Welcome to the fourth in Vibrant Health's series of educational webinars designed to deepen your understanding of health and nutrition. The topic today is meat, animal protein, the food that we believe has made us the alleged masters of our planet. Our bodies need protein, for without it we have no muscles, no hormones, no neurotransmitters, and therefore no brainwaves or mind to speak of. And we'd have no skeleton to hold us up against the pull of gravity, preventing us from becoming just a puddle of protoplasm, filling some pothole in the roadway of evolution. It is a good thing that Mother Earth hides away protein in both obscure and obvious places, whether delicious or less so. From therapsids to Homo habilis, insects and plants gave our progenitors the protein to grant an existence. Our lesser-minded ancestors instinctively, or perhaps luckily, found the more obvious choices. 4 million years ago, timid, 4-foot-tall Lucy and her friends sneaked out of the brush as evening set in after the big cats, hyenas, and vultures had had their fill, to pull scraps of fetid protein-rich flesh from the bones of a felled short-necked giraffe or antelope. That extra protein helped her children grow larger and smarter until they captured fire. The heat of the flames lit up and warmed a brighter future. Meat thrust into the fire became denatured, easier to digest. Its bounty of nutrients was released, enlarging the hominid brain, inflating it with new ideas. I will talk from the viewpoint here that the advent of expanding human intelligence has been a largely positive event, and then hope to show how something that began so well, that is, the consumption of meat, has become so risky in our modern age. Ancient bones and garbage dumps and burial sites can tell many tales. Clues gleaned from them inform the study of Paleolithic nutrition. Indications are that abundant consumption of meat at about 2 pounds per day did not result in all of the negative effects ascribed to meat consumption today, at least as far as can be determined given the dearth of soft tissue for close study. Then, meat provided abundant protein for the development of large, robust, physically fit, strong, mentally astute, disease-resistant human beings. Today, highly controlled factory farming has expanded globally to serve all but the most remote societies. The effect has been to maintain meat at an inflation-adjusted price lower than it was in 1970. The relative affordability has fueled significant increases in worldwide meat consumption. The affordable, abundant meat supply has permitted humans to once again achieve the stature of our Paleolithic ancestors. And if someone should choose today to train for athletic competition, then we see that today's meat proteins can also build a strong, durable human capable of succeeding in his or her chosen endeavor. So on this rather macro level, meat today and the wild meats of thousands of years ago appear to perform equally well. Whereas studies of Homo erectus's diet and of more recent Paleolithic nutrition indicate that meat consumption before the advent of agriculture brought phenomenal benefits, heavy meat consumption today is associated with obesity, cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and other, quote, diseases of affluence, close quotes. They're referred to as diseases of affluence because, as societies became more sophisticated and stratified, meat became one of the most expensive components of the diet. Only the wealthy could afford to eat themselves into the grave. So we must ask whether it is the consumption of animal protein per se, either wild or factory farmed, or rather the type of animal protein consumed today, is at fault. What makes meat so deadly, and has it always been so? Let's examine the deadly part of the question first. In the U.S. and other developed countries, meat composes a significant portion of the normal diet, contributing more than 15% of daily energy intake measured as calories, 40% of daily protein intake, and 20% of daily fat intake, although that estimate is sometimes low. The demand for meat in developing countries continues to grow as the consumption of meat increases with rising incomes. A dietary shift toward high meat consumption supplants the consumption of cereals and other foods of plant origin. Although reducing cereal grain consumption is no great concern, diminishing other plant foods in favor of filling one's stomach with red meat has undesirable consequences. The consumption of red meat, that is, beef, pork, lamb, veal, mutton, is an important part of the diet in developed countries. Studies in the 1970s and 1980s provided the first indication that high red meat consumption correlated with higher rates of chronic disease, including cardiovascular disease and cancer, the current leading causes of chronic illness and death in the United States and other westernized countries. There are several possible mechanisms and some mutagenic substances in animals that explain the relationship between red meat consumption and diseases of affluence. The possible factors include bile acids, obesity and insulin stemming from overconsumption of meat, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, N-nitroso compounds, heme iron in red meat, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and non-human sialic acids. Farmed animals of today contain high amounts of fat and saturated fat. Even lean meat contains about 40% to 50% total fat. When you or I eat meat, the presence of fat triggers the release of bile acids. This is normal. The bile is there to emulsify dietary fats, preparing them for absorption and metabolism. So, if it is normal that dietary fat increases bile acid secretion from the gallbladder into the intestines, and if bile is necessary to emulsify fats, what can the danger be? The danger is in ignoring the rule of moderation, eating too much. Bile acids accelerate loss of and trigger reactive proliferation by the cells lining the intestine. The exposure of cells of the gastrointestinal tract to repeated high physiologic levels of bile acids is an important risk factor for gastrointestinal cancers. A persistently high dietary fat intake from excessive meat eating raises the risk of colorectal cancer at least. High bile acid exposure quickly generates reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species that disrupt cell membranes and mitochondria, induce DNA damage, may mutate cells, and trigger cell death. Chronic exposure to bile acids, ironically, reduces the capability of epithelial cells to automatically collapse and die, a process called apoptosis, thereby cluttering the intestinal walls with damaged, dysfunctional cells that have overstayed their welcome. Those cells with reduced apoptosis capability tend to survive and selectively proliferate. Bile acids cause DNA damage and can create apoptosis-resistant cells, making bile acids likely carcinogens. But, to be clear, it is the secondary bile acids that appear to be the culprits. These are formed in the colon by resident bacteria, converting the small amount of primary bile acids that reach the colon into the secondary forms, mainly deoxycholic acid and lithocholic acid. But their effects are not just limited to the colon. Bile acids have been found to be causative agents of other malignancies of the gastrointestinal tract, namely of the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, liver, pancreas, and biliary tract. Secondary bile acids are potent, harsh biochemicals you will not want loitering in your GI tract. Eliminating red meat from your diet or reducing its consumption to an occasional indiscretion in favor of fish, poultry, and vegetable proteins will do much to counteract your exposure to potentially carcinogenic bile acids. Dinners centered on a juicy 12-ounce prime rib load one's body with unwelcome saturated and omega-6 fats. Such diets are strongly and positively associated with overweight that, in turn, deteriorates insulin sensitivity, particularly when the overweight is present as abdominal fat. How does eating fat make you fat? Are dietary fats from the meat that are not burned off quickly stored as fat? No. Protein and fat are digested slowly. Around 55% of ingested protein is destined to become blood sugar, but the conversion rate is so gradual that protein itself is not responsible for rises in blood sugar after a meal. High-fat diets, providing more than 30% of the day's calories, something quite typical in the U.S., suppress the synthesis of blood fats and triglycerides by the liver. Biochemical cues delay the manufacture of body fat. Additionally, protein and fat inhibit carbohydrate absorption from the GI tract. Well, if protein and fat from meat are not directly responsible for the obesity associated with high meat, high fat diets, what leads to the obesity? Too many calories are part of the answer. High-fat red meats become part of energy-dense high-fat diets that provide an extra caloric load. Another answer is found in how saturated fats from meat and palm oil affect insulin sensitivity. Saturated fat significantly worsens insulin resistance, while monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats improve it. Each type of fat modifies the composition of cell membranes that in turn influences the cell's reaction to insulin. When saturated fats from meat lead to insulin resistance, cells fail to take up enough blood sugar. That leads to elevated blood sugar. The liver reacts to bring down the elevated blood sugar by converting it to triglycerides that are then stored away as body fat. Insulin resistance is the biochemical link tying different abnormalities together in the metabolic syndrome, defining diabetes, exacerbating cardiovascular disease, and feeding cancer cells. But boy, that prime rib sure tastes good. It is estimated that 20% of cancer cases are caused by being obese. Fatty diets favor insulin resistance and obesity, which in turn increases cancer risk. The cancer types involved are endometrial, esophageal adenocarcinoma, colorectal, and postmenopausal breast cancers, as well as prostate, renal, leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, malignant melanoma, and thyroid tumors. Insulin and insulin-like growth factor receptors form a complex network on cell surfaces that mediate insulin and IGF responses. One of those responses is mitosis, the ordinary process of cell division by which the body replaces dead cells. Insulin resistance from high-fat diets and obesity result in chronically high insulin levels that force increased production of insulin and IGF receptors on cell membranes. Surfaces of most cancer cells are populated with high numbers of insulin and IGF receptors. So when insulin levels remain high, the insulin and IGF receptors react with serum insulin and IGF, sending signals through the cell that stimulate rapid mitosis and cancer cell proliferation, raising the risk of tissue invasion and metastasis. At the same time, some of the signals sent through the cancer cells make them more resistant to stimuli that might otherwise lead to their normal programmed death, their apoptosis. In other words, high insulin and IGF levels caused by high fat intake and red meats may make cancer cells more numerous, aggressive, and invincible. Cancer cells must also have access to a blood supply. As a tumor forms, a new vascular bed appears to feed the growing mass. High blood sugar allows IGF-1 to stimulate smooth muscle cell proliferation and migration inside blood vessels, a process linked to the abnormal vascular growth that is a hallmark of cancer and of the pathophysiology of atherosclerosis. Eating a lot of red meat, in other words, sets off a biochemical cascade that supports obesity. White adipose tissue-derived hormones and cytokine messengers, such as leptin, adiponectin, and inflammatory biochemicals, can be causative factors for tumor development. The saturated fats from the meat, plus biochemicals secreted by white fat, pressure tissue cells to resist the commands of insulin, leading to both chronically elevated circulating insulin and sugar levels. More receptors for insulin and IGF form on the cells, setting the stage for the development of metabolic syndrome, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Truly, meat is a double-edged sword. We need the protein or we have no bodies or brains, and we need its iron too, which presents another problem. Iron is present in food as heme and non-heme iron. 30% to 60% of the iron in meat, fish, and poultry is heme. Non-heme iron is found in dried fruits, some vegetables, beans, and eggs. Heme iron is absorbed at a rate of about 25 to 35% compared to non-heme iron at 10%. Our bodies have become too accustomed to the easy availability of iron from meat. But here we see the need for moderation again. High intakes of heme iron from meat can cause oxidative stress and DNA damage by both oxidation and alkylation, the cross-linking of DNA segments by alkyl groups, chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Effects are exacerbated by alcohol, but thankfully counteracted by zinc, an antioxidant. And heme iron can speed the formation of N-nitroso compounds, which are potent carcinogens, and have been identified as growth elements for Helicobacter pylori, that's always tough to say, an established risk factor for stomach cancer. Indeed, too much dietary iron is linked to cancers of the gastrointestinal tract in human and animal studies, but, and this is worth mentioning, no link can be made between heme iron and postmenopausal breast cancer. You may have heard of these next two highwaymen lurking around meat to steal your health: heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Heterocyclic amines, or HCAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, are formed when meat is cooked at high temperatures, as in pan frying, deep frying, or grilling directly over an open flame. It doesn't matter whether it is beef, pork, fish, or poultry that is subjected to such treatment. The high heat creates the HCAs and PAHs. Laboratory experiments tell us that HCAs and PAHs are mutagenic, that they cause changes to DNA that may increase the risk of cancer. HCAs are formed when amino acids, sugars, and creatine or creatinine in muscle tissue undergo chemical reactions at high temperatures. PAHs are formed when fat and juices from meat drip onto a heated surface or open flame, causing more flames and smoke. The smoke contains PAHs that stick to the surface of the meat. They're also present in smoked salmon, smoked oysters, smoked turkey, smoked bacon, how sad, and other foods, as well as environmentally in cigarette smoke and automobile exhaust. Temperature, cooking method, and cooking time are the key factors here. Meats cooked at high temperature above 300 degrees Fahrenheit, or that are cooked for a long period of time, will form more HCAs. Well done grilled or barbecued chicken and steak all have high concentrations of HCAs. HCAs and PAHs, though, are converted to DNA-perverting carcinogens only after they have been metabolized and activated by specific enzymes. There are many, and their level of activity and their efficiency at turning HCAs and PAHs into carcinogens varies widely among individuals. So we can say exposure to HCAs and PAHs carry potential risk of cancer that is highly dependent on a person's unique biochemical makeup. In animal models, rodents fed a diet supplemented with HCAs developed tumors of the breast, colon, liver, skin, lung, prostate, and other organs. Rodents fed PAHs developed leukemia and tumors of the gastrointestinal tract and lungs. But the doses given were thousands of times greater than what a person would consume in a normal diet. Although a definitive link tying HCA and PAH exposure to cancer in humans has not yet been firmly established, clues from human population studies continue to stimulate human research. Researchers have found that high consumption of well-done, fried, or barbecued meat was associated with increased risks of colorectal, pancreatic, and prostate cancer. However, other studies have found no association with risks of colorectal or prostate cancer. Bottom line, a definitive link between HCA and PAH exposure to cancer from cooked meats in humans has not yet been firmly established. Yet concern remains because individual variation in the activity of enzymes that metabolize HCAs and PAHs may result in exposure differences even among people who ingest the same amount of these compounds. Also, people may have been exposed to PAHs from other environmental sources, not just food, as automobile exhaust and tobacco smoke. PAH, HCA, heme iron, saturated fat, obesity, insulin resistance. These are all tools heavy meat consumption can use to unhinge your health. But through careful food choices and moderate usage, the mortal effect from them can be minimized. But starting in 2014, the discovery of a specific sialic acid in red meat pointed the way to what may be the smoking gun in red meat that guarantees their lethality. Sialic acids are a family of 43 different derivatives of neuraminic acid, a 9-carbon backbone simple sugar, a monosaccharide. They are found in all life forms, but primarily in vertebrates, that is, animals with backbones. The most common member of the family of sialic acids is N-acetyl-neuraminic acid, abbreviated as Nu5AC. Remember the A. It gets a good grade for being healthy. Sialic acids are components of glycoproteins and mucoproteins. Glycoproteins are proteins with sugar attached to them. They are always found in the outer cell membrane with the sugar facing out. Glycoproteins are involved in nearly every cellular process. For example, they are essential for cell-mediated immunity, cell-to-cell communication, and human reproduction. As such, they are found in abundance in outer cell membranes. When we eat muscle and organ tissue of animals, we eat their forms of sialic acids. In general, the human mammal, while eating the red meats, beef, pork, and lamb, consumes identical, convertible, or similar sialic acids to our own. Specifically, we consume sialic acid glycoprotein molecules containing N-acetyl-neuraminic acid, our Nu5AC, and N-glycolineuramic acid, or Nu5GC for short. This latter sialic acid is a problem. Back in the old, really old days, prior to about 3 million years ago, our proto-human predecessors had the ability to enzymatically convert Nu5AC to Nu5GC. They had an enzyme that could convert Nu5AC to the sialic acid Nu5GC. The CMAH gene directed the production of the necessary enzyme, cytidine monophosphate N-acetylneuraminic acid hydroxylase. Then, about 3 million years ago, for reasons as yet undetermined, a genetic change occurred, and prehumans lost the ability to make the CMAH enzyme. Did the change confer some new immunity or improve fertility? Such is the case with the especially deadly malarial parasite Plasmodium reichanaui. It can tightly bind to red blood cells containing Nu5GC. If the ability to synthesize Nu5GC is lost, its presence in cell membranes will diminish, thwarting the pathogen. Survival of the species would improve. Or was the loss of CMAH enzyme an error? We don't know yet, but it occurred near the time when meat entered the diet 2 to 3 million years ago. Our lineage lost the ability to synthesize vitamin C when it became abundant in the diet from the plants our ancestors were eating. Could something similar have happened with sialic acids? We need sialic acids in the glycoproteins of our cell membranes. They are in all foods other than mammals in small amounts, so it must have been necessary for pre-humans, before they were eating meat, to find and convert any potentially usable sialic acid into the ones needed for our specific cell membrane glycoproteins. When our ancestors began consuming meat with its rich supply of closely associated Nu5AC, Perhaps the mechanism to convert it to new 5-GC was shut down. It looked like we had plenty of the right sialic acid coming in from the diet, so why bother making more? The mutation of the CMAH gene caused a subsequent and significant change to the sialic acid configurations of cell surfaces. Relative to others, humans became the odd mammal, the ones with an abundance of new 5AC in our cells and virtually no new 5GC. But other mammals retained the ability to convert new 5AC to new 5GC. We ate them then, and we continue to eat them today. Although humans cannot make new 5GC, ingestion of new 5GC glycoproteins leads to new 5GC incorporation into intestinal walls, from where it seeps into circulation at a steady state level for several hours to subsequently be incorporated into other tissues. We insinuate dietary new 5GC into glycoproteins and glycolipids of the brain, liver, heart, muscle, and epithelial lining of organs, in the cells lining arteries and veins, in fetal tissues, and abundantly in malignant tumors. Thus, new 5GC can be metabolically incorporated from food into human tissues, sticking it into the carbohydrate structures that coat the surface of cells. But the sialic acid new 5GC, which was once an accepted component of cell membranes, has become a foreign, non-human substance. It has been that way for 2 to 3 million years. The presence of new 5GC containing structures can trigger immune responses. New 5GC has effectively become an antigen that stimulates the production of antibodies against itself and the tissues it has connected to. Incorporation of this now non-human sialic acid N-glycolylneuramic acid, or new 5GC, into the tissues of red meat eaters can cause interaction with inflammation-provoking antibodies. The situation has been with us for a long, long time. It is clear now why eating a lot of red meat can result in cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and on and on. Plants and poultry do not contain new 5GC. Fish samples studied so far show only low to trace amounts, suggesting dietary safety akin to plants and poultry. Wild meat from mammals does provide new 5GC, so apparently the potential problem of red meat consumption have been with us for quite some time. So it can be expected that our ancestors were not so ideally free of cancer and heart disease as we like to imagine. However, the low 4 to 5% fat content of wild meat effectively removes the dangers caused by high saturated fat intake, insulin resistance, and heavy secretion of bile acids. The abundant anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids in wild meat, plus our ancestors' huge intake of plant foods, provided a flood of antioxidants that would help counteract the inflammatory effects of new 5GC. It is when balancing micronutrition is absent in the presence of abundant new 5GC that degenerative disease can progress. So, including poultry and fish for concentrated protein within a diet centered on plant foods can help keep you out of range of red meat's smoking gun. And turnover of glycoproteins in cell membranes at the hands of hydrolytic and glycolytic enzymes can gradually eliminate new 5GC from tissues. So an occasional Five Guys cheeseburger may be acceptable as long as you wrap it in lettuce rather than a white bun. And that brings our webinar number 4 to a close. Thank you very much for listening.
What? What? Hello. What happened? What happened to the end?
Hi, Mark. This is Jess Lawson at Vibrant Health Headquarters. Go ahead and start to ask questions. We have a first question already.
Well, but maybe I mean the last paragraph didn't play out.
This is Jess Lawson. I'm not sure what happened, but let's continue with questions. So the first question from Valora is, does this information only apply to factory farmed meat? What about grass-fed?
Unfortunately, can everybody hear me, by the way? Hope my headset's working. Unfortunately, it makes no difference whether the meat is grass-fed or Martian-fed or anything. If it's red meat, if it's a red meat mammal, it is going to have all the bad factors in it that I went through in the webinar, including the new 5GC. So you want to stick with poultry that contains no new 5GC and fish in which only trace amounts of new 5GC have been found. So the small amount of new 5GC in fish protein can easily be dealt with the enzymatic cleaners in your body that will get rid of the new 5GC. Okay. Hello. Everything is silent. Oh, Jess, are you there?
Hi, Mark. I'm here.
Okay, good.
So if you pull up the chat bar on the right, there seems to be another question in there.
Wait a minute.
Somebody is asking, what's the difference between grass-fed meat and grass-finished meat?
Semantics. Well, a little bit of semantics. Usually we think of grass-fed meat as, pardon me, coming from an animal that has spent their whole life out in the pasture eating grass. Grass-finished meat is probably a feedlot-fed animal that is turned out into the pasture for a certain amount of time. What that time is, I don't know. I haven't researched it. But grass-finished meat sounds like a quick gloss, like they're painting shellac over the animal to make it sound better. But the fact remains that if it is a red meat animal, you're still going to have the sialic acids that you don't want and the saturated fats. So let's see. Are there any more questions? I have my chat bar open and I'm looking for anything that pops up. Oh. I could read a little poetry if anybody'd like. Well, either everyone's asleep or my computer broke down. There I am. I look that funny, huh?
Mark, there's a question from Shayna there. Do you see it?
Well, what are your views on the keto diet? Oh, yeah, that one did come through while I was mugging. Well, I'd say short term, you can probably survive. But my understanding of that diet is that it is so heavy in meats that you do run the risk
Mark.
of...
I hate to interrupt, but it sounds like when you have the webcam going, we're hearing an echo. So we'll have to work on that for next time. But for now.
Okay. Is there still an echo? I hope not. I think the keto diet.
I'm still hearing the echo. Do you mind turning off your computer speakers?
But I don't have my computer speakers on. I just have my headset plugged into the front, and when the headset is plugged in the front, the main speakers on the computer are shut off. Is it still echoing? Okay, well, to get back to the keto diet, it is an extreme diet and is therefore not really intended to meet long-term dietetic goals for good health. It'll help trim off body fat. It can give people energy who've been lagging energy. It can help reset some of the biochemical events that take place when one is diabetic. But once one has spent some time on the keto diet, I think they should gradually get back to a more omnivorous, rounded diet that includes a lot of vegetables and some poultry and some fish, and forgets about sugar, alcohol, tobacco, and red meats and grains. Okay, sounds good now. Is seafood good? Yes. Craig, seafood is good. As I mentioned there at the end, the amount of sialic acids in seafood is minimal. New 5GC is there only in trace amounts, and the glycolytic enzymes that you have in your body will basically destroy it before it ever really even takes up place in the cell membrane. Also, the fatty acids in seafood are far less saturated and do not trigger the heavy bile flow that can erode cells in the gut and create damage to the DNA. No, echo, echo, echo. Are there any more questions? No, fish, if you're going to limit your diet to one form of protein, fish would be the one. Although, depending on the fish selection, you do run the risk of perhaps accumulating too much mercury, which can upset neurological systems specifically, because the mercury interferes with the flow of electrons. But if a diet is, if the high fish consumption is matched with an equally high or higher vegetable content, then the sweeping and cleansing and the antioxidant effects of all those plants will help take out any heavy metals that might be in the fish. Now, having said that, I cannot in the same breath say, oh, well, switch to poultry instead of fish, because poultry has a higher saturated fatty acid content. And when it comes to chicken, the body temperature of chicken is the exact incubation temperature for a known and potent microbe that causes cancer. So if you do eat chicken, by the way, you should cook it until it's ready to fall off the bone. That is the only way you can destroy that pathogen. Okay. Yes, you will have a link available, Julie. And have I mentioned pork? Well, yes, pork was kind of flitted in and out of the discussion. It is one of the primary red meats. And in spite of the changes in feeding pork that took place after World War II, whereby the Pork Growers Association advised all their farmers to feed more grain and vegetables to the animals as a way of lowering its saturated fat content. Even though the saturated fat content has decreased in pork, it is still an abundant, rich source of new 5GC. And even back in the 1920s, I forgot the guy's name, there was a researcher in Canada who was doing blood work studies on cancer patients and, of course, people without cancer. And what he noticed was that within 2 hours of eating a meal that contained pork as its meat portion, the blood chemistry of that normal person would become identical to the blood chemistry of a person with cancer. I don't know exactly what it was that he was finding because I haven't been able to dig up the original research. I only read the report on it. But, pork, well, let's put it this way. Pork is so close to being human that it's almost as if you're a cannibal when you eat pork. I know that's a real shame for everyone who loves bacon. But, pork's not so good. Basically, just take all the red meats and put them in a basket and say, either I'm never going to eat them or I'm only going to eat them sparingly because I don't want to expose myself to the carcinogenic aspects of them. As a matter of fact, let's see here. Now, this might be a good place to read that final paragraph from the webinar that got mostly chopped off. I say, including poultry and fish for concentrated protein within a diet centered on plant foods can keep you out of range of red meat smoking gun. And turnover of glycoproteins in cell membranes at the hands of hydrolytic and glycolytic enzymes can gradually eliminate new 5GC from tissues. So an occasional Five Guys cheeseburger may be acceptable as long as you wrap it in lettuce rather than a white bun. And that was the way the webinar was supposed to end. But it mentions the enzyme processes that help clear new 5GC from your tissues. No, pork is not the other white meat. Pork is a red meat. Really, again, this also brings up a key point. Here's pork, a red meat, known to have a certain degree of lethality associated with it. And the Pork Growers Association, or whatever they're called, is trying to market this food in a certain light to make it more appealing. When it comes to food advertising, a good rule is to not believe any of it. On your own, go study what the food is and see if it is worthwhile. We are, after all, a consuming society, and we are continually being fed all sorts of disinformation to control our behavior and make us do things that oftentimes are not in our best interest. Oh, Shana asks, how does Vibrant Health juice their greens and how are they able to put it in powder form? Well, the the true juice powders that we have are the cereal grass juice powders, and those are harvested and taken to a truck at the edge of the field, and it's driven down to a corner of the field where there is a juicing facility, and the newly cut grass is first washed, rinsed to get dust and dirt and bugs and things off it, and then it is put through the juicer, and then you have this deep green juice, which goes into a freezer and is frozen into blocks. These blocks are then held in storage, frozen, until needed. When they are needed, they are then put into a freeze dryer where the ice is evaporated and you're left with powdered green juice. For other plant materials, they are either air dried or freeze dried as the whole plant and then powdered. It's usually a Fitz mill or something like that that's used to grind them into a fine powder. Sorry, Michael, I know red meat tastes so good. That's why I say, boy, a 12-ounce, cut of beef done right can sure taste good. But, if you do that once a week, then make sure you eat a lot of vegetables the rest of the week. Well, Julie, I also feel for you. I grew up in a household that was centered around beef. My grandfather came over from Germany as a butcher. He had apprenticed over there in Germany and then came to the U.S. to carry on his career. This was before World War I. And he was a butcher his entire life and died just short of his 78th birthday of about his 5th or 6th heart attack. And as you know, cardiovascular disease is often referred to as vascular cancer because the same changes that happen inside the medial layer, the muscle layer of the arteries, that creates the beginning of the coronary occlusion are the same kind of changes that happen in cancer. It is cells that have run amok. Do I know what my next webinar topic will be? Oh, well, Jess, let me see. Do I have it here? Oh, that's something else. I have it right here on my desk. Yes, I used to know. At one point I knew. Give me a second, I'm rustling papers. Where did it go? See, I was organizing things yesterday, and so now I can't find it. I'll bet you know, though, because you made the list. Okay, Mark, you bonehead. Where'd you put that thing?
Hi, Mark. Sorry for
Yes.
the delay. So your next webinar topic is omega-3s in Paleolithic times. That will be on Wednesday, August 15th, also at 3 p.m. Feel free to elaborate on that topic.
Okay, well, omega-3s are kind of dear to my heart. They were the subject of my master's thesis back in the early 1980s. And I have a kind of a long history with them. And, the omega-3s are becoming increasingly important, even beyond the initial research that was presented to us back in 1980. Back in 1980, omega-3s were presented as a wonderful heart-healthy nutrient. And so much more has been learned since then about their anti-inflammatory properties, their cardiovascular health properties, their cognitive benefits. But there are also some cautions to take into consideration, because without a sound, strong vascular system, you can take enough omega-3s to give yourself a stroke. You see, you can have strokes that are based on blood clots, or you can have strokes that are based on leakage. And if your vascular system is not tight and firm with good, strong collagen bonds in all the capillaries, you can thin your blood enough that it will start leaking out through those capillaries and cause a stroke. So I'll be talking about how to use omega-3 supplementation safely and carefully, and how to derive all the benefits from it. And lest you think that alpha-linolenic acid, the vegetable form omega-3, is any good, forget that. I'll explain why in the webinar. Quite simply, your body can't convert it to the forms of omega-3 that you need. And we'll cover that in the topic too. So that's what's coming up. Well, Julie, I see your comment. If you do a green drink on a daily basis, that will help a lot in bringing you the micronutrition that will help protect your tissues from inflammation and the damage that can be caused by eating red meat, especially if you use green vibrance. There is a boatload of a broad range of antioxidants in there that can protect every tissue in your body. Also, spectrum vibrance is fantastic as an antioxidant. You can even put the two of them together. Okay, are there any more questions coming up?
I have no questions over here, Mark.
Okay, so I guess that wraps it up for today, and we'll see you next month. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.